Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat. I'm with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio. I hope everyone is doing well this evening and that life finds you all blessed. Before we go into the show and the topic for this evening, which will be somewhat linked to the Tower of Babel and the confounding of languages, and as to what the tower was, because I know that many people teach that, and I used to believe even that it was some kind of Stargate technology and that they were trying to create a portal, a wormwood, a gate between worlds and dimensions where time and distance could be breached and they could just, stepping through, come out somewhere else. And I had always, well, not always, but at one time I had believed that according to the Sumerian traditions, that both the moon and Mars had already been colonized, and that way stations, what the Sumerian mythology calls way stations, had been established in those two places to assist with the Anunnaki endeavors of gathering and transporting gold back to their planet in order to pulverizing it into dust to then suspend it into their atmosphere so that a ozone breach could be protected and that a shield would be established to prevent the destruction of the sun's rays as their planet came near to it in orbit, which we know now that the Earth isn't moving around the sun and that neither are any of the other planets, that they all move in circle around Polaris. So the whole conception of, massive, well, even the sun being massive and then other planetary systems being in place around them, which are so distant that traveling to them and arriving to them that they would be as large as the Earth, that all that has to be reconsidered. And even the sun, in our skies, it can be determined, as well as the moon, that they are of equal size and that they are of very small size, so that building an entire culture and civilization, ancient civilization, upon them would be impossibility. But anyways, and so I used to believe all that and embraced all of that in order to establish, again, the whole, as far as what everybody is pushing with regard to the extraterrestrials, the ancient aliens, that they are from out there, that they came here long time ago and that they created modern humanity, which is what is being pushed based upon that we live in an ever expanding where every one of the stars in the sky is itself a sun, some bigger than ours, some smaller, but all with the possibility of having planets in orbit around them, should they be in the Goldilocks zone, that they could have evolved life as we see present here in our so called solar system. That all of these things, I mean, the whole thing with Star Wars and Star Trek and people from the future and time jumpers and all this, I mean, my goodness, when you have that much distance, that much space, and that much imagination, one can run wild with the fantasies. And so, um, understanding, that as far with regard to the cosmology, that the luminaries, even the sun, is a very small size, and that the planets, the wandering stars, would be even so much smaller. That, that whole dream of, or even the stories that the Anunnaki, are from Nibiru, and that they um, had come here long ago, and that they were shipping back gold. I mean, it, in my opinion, shows you just how far back and how organized the deception, the foundation for establishing the coming of the Antichrist had been. And because for those that don't know, have not studied or looked into in great detail the Sumerian mythologies, I've read and studied them all. Have read all of the books of Zachariah Sitchin that he wrote, and all of the texts about the Anunnaki within them, and the story that he puts forth. And what I told you is what many people believe, having studied that material. And it is also, the cosmology is heliocentric. It's based on their having come from a planet that was outside of the orbit of Neptune, and Alalu, which was the first person, or the first so-called Anunnaki to escape from there, came here long ago to the earth in order to find gold, in order to save and to redeem himself and to create healing for his planet with regard to, creating this, fixing the ozone depletion. And so that's the story. And then after he arrived here and sending back, I mean, beaming back, they claimed that they had radio technology that allowed them to beam back messages all the way back to the people on their planet, all that distance from the third planet to the outer portion of the solar system. I mean, that's some strong Wi-Fi. But anyway, so they say that he was able to get a team of other 50 initially Anunnaki to come here to the Earth and to establish the first home in the faraway called Eridu. And Eridu means home in the faraway. And that they called it the Eden. And that this, supposedly, according to their mythos, is where they then took the Bigfoot type hairy hominid and began to genetically experiment upon this creature, and then engaging in genetic experimentation as well as direct bestiality, they were able to bring it to a semblance of more human like qualities and to be able to teach it menial tasks. And so this is why a lot of people believe that the extraterrestrials are our creators, and that the reason you can't find, the missing link with regard to the whole evolutionary model of we have evolved from the monkeys, or that we were, you know, once base stock, and that our ancestors more appropriate look like and may have possibly been ape like. I mean, that one delusion atop another, atop another, atop another. And again, it is based on the stories in the Sumerian mythologies that the Anunnaki came from a planet on the outer aspect of our solar system, and that it crosses near at the outside of Mars where the so called asteroid belt is, and that this asteroid belt is had been what used to be a planet that used to orbit in that area, um, and that they it was them that came here and that jumped the gun on evolution, which is partially true because according to the story, the biblical narrative is that the rebel angels rebelling against God and the holy angels were cast out of heaven and were exiled, banished here to the earth, and then being put into a place of physicality where things take on form in the manner that we see it in the physicality, in the physical dimension. They, it says in the stories, became corporeal beings, and they began to condense, that the judgment that was levied upon them was that they would take on bodies of flesh, much like Adam and Eve when they were cast out and banished here to the earth. And so the same story applies to them, that they cast out began to take on bodies of flesh, which, it even speaks about this in the Sumerian mythologies, even though they had much longer lifespans. And even in the Bible, we see that the early generations of humanity, the children of Adam, lived up to 1,000 years. But the Anunnaki, these fallen angels, they had seemingly immortal lifespans, but they are described as having succumbed to death. And so, anyways, I'm going to revisit the story of the Tower of Babel from the book of Jasher, the what are the stories? Oh, the Legends of the Jews, and also the Assater, I believe it is. And so I'll go ahead and go into that, and then I can comment more and lead you more into what I'm going to bring forth. And this is also part of what I have revealed in what will be my speech on decrypting the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries. And this story actually ties into that, which is a speech I'll be giving at the Flat Earth conference in November. The other thing is that I'll be going on with Rob Skiba tonight at midnight to 2 a.m., and I expect all of you to stay up and hang out with us. Just joking. But, anyways, I know it's late, um, but, maybe if you're in a different time zone, you can hang out with us. But, anyways, I'm going to be talking about the calendar system and revealing how the dynamics of the motions of the luminaries create the calendar system which we should be following, in my opinion, because it is the Enochian system is the only one that is based on the movements of the luminaries and determined by those um, unfoldings. So, anyways, let's go into. Oh, I'll also be sharing a story from the legends of the patriarchs and the prophets, which is also very interesting about the Tower of Babel. Okay, in a portion of my speech, I write the last aspect is what was the Tower of Babel and the point of its constructions. And my answer leading into what will be these quotations from these other ancient sources is that many heliocentrists teach that the purpose of constructing the Tower of Babel was to create a stargate for use in traveling to distant planets of distant galaxies. However, reading the ancient manuscripts, it becomes clear that Nimrod was attempting to reach the top of the firmament so that in breaching it he could wage war with God and the celestial angels. He had a plan to deceive his followers into believing that he had succeeded in killing God and his celestial host, as is more detailed in the stories below. And so, remember, he established himself as God, and he declared himself to be God here on earth. And so, what he was going to do is, as I will reveal it, is that he had planned to build a tower tall enough to reach the top of the firmament so that trying to break through, they could then wage war against God, which is, you know, completely ludicrous. But yet, so many people believed him that he became basically the first New World Order dictator, much like the Antichrist will be at the end of days. And so I'll share this short quote first before going into the longer one, and then some of these other accounts from these other ancient sources. And then I'll comment and tell you also why I am speaking about that. For they had said, come and let us build for ourselves a city, and let us take axes and break open the firmament, so that the water flow from there and descend below, that he may not do unto us as he did to the generation of the flood. And let us wage war with those in heaven, and establish ourselves there as gods. So that's from the Chronicles of Jeremiah. All right, this is the story from the Legends of the Patriarchs and the Prophets. First, we will take Jewish tradition and then Mohammedan traditions. And the rabbis relate as follows. After the time of the great deluge, men feared a recurrence of that great overthrow, and they assembled and inhabited the plain of Shinar. There they no longer obeyed the gentle guidance of Shem, the son of Noah, but they cast the kingdom of God far from them, and chose as their sovereign Nimrod, the son of Cush, the son of Ham. Nimrod became very great in power, having been born when his father was old. He was dearly beloved, and every whim had been gratified. This is interesting. Many of you have lately asked me about the garments of power. Well, this is actually mentioned in these particular texts. It says, Cush gave him the garment which God made for Adam when he was expelled from paradise, and which Adam had given to Enoch, and Enoch to Methuselah, and Methuselah had left to Noah, and which Noah had taken with him into the ark. Ham stole it from his father in the ark, which in the ark concealed it and gave it to his son Cush. Nimrod, vested in this garment, was unconquerable and irresistible. All beasts and birds fell down before him, and his enemies were overcome almost without a struggle. It was thus that he triumphed over the king of Babylon. His kingdom rapidly extended, and he became daily more powerful till at last he was sole monarch over the whole world. Nimrod rejected God as his ruler. He trusted in his own might, and therefore it is said of him, he was mighty in hunting and sinned before the Lord, for he was a hunter of the sons of men in their languages. And he said to them, leave the judgments of Shem and adhere to the judgments of Nimrod. But Nimrod was uneasy in his mind, and he feared lest someone should arise who would be empowered by God to overthrow him. Therefore he said to his subjects, come, let us build a great city, and let us settle therein, that we may not be scattered over the face of the earth, and be destroyed once more by a flood. And in the midst of our city let us build a high tower, so lofty as to overdrop any flood, and so strong as to resist any fire. Yea, let us do further, let us prop up the heaven on all sides from the top of the tower, that it may not again fall and inundate us. Then let us climb up into heaven and break it with axes, and drain its water away where it can do no injury. Thus shall we avenge the death of our ancestors, and at the summit of our tower we will place an image of our God with a sword in his hand, and he shall fight for us. Thus shall we obtain a great name and reign over the universe. Even if all were not inspired with the same presumption, yet all saw in the tower a means of refuge from a future deluge, and therefore they readily fell in with the proposal of the king. 600,000 men were set to work under 1,000 captains, and raised the tower to the height of 70 miles. A great flight of stairs on the east side was used by those carrying up material, and a flight on the west side served those who descended, having deposited their burdens. If a workman fell down and was killed, no one heeded. But if any of the bricks gave way, there was an outcry. Some shot arrows into the sky, and they came down tinged with blood. Then they shouted and cried, see, we have killed everyone who is in heaven. Curiously enough, A similar story is told by the Chinese of one of their earlier monarchs, who thought himself so great that he might war against heaven. He shot an arrow into the sky, and a drop of blood fell. So, said he, I have killed God. Also, there's another text, I don't remember exactly which one it is, but it basically tells the story of how that was Nimrod's plan, and that he had taken these blood soaked arrows up with him, and, shooting some up, he said, oh, these are the arrows that return. And, having blood on them, he was able to tell the story and spin it that he had killed God and the holy angels, and people believed him. That's so. Anyways, continue. At this time, Abraham was 48. He was filled with grief and shame at the impiety of his fellow men, and he prayed to God, "O Lord, I confound their tongues, for I have spied unrighteousness and strife in the city." Then the Lord called the 70 angels who surrounded his throne, that they should confuse the language of the builders, so that none should understand the other. The angels came down and cast confusion among the subject of Nimrod, and 70 distinct languages sprang up, and the men could not understand each other, so that they separated from one from another, and were spread over the surface of the earth. The tower itself was destroyed in part. It was in 3 portions. The upper story was destroyed by fire from heaven. The basement was overthrown by an earthquake, and the middle story was left intact. However, we are not informed. Oh, sorry. It says the middle story was left intact. How, comma, we are not informed. And so now this is a different story. This is from Mohammedan tradition, it says, or Musulman. We will now take the Musulman tradition. Nimrod, who according to the Arabs was the son of Canaan and brother of Cush. Remember, Canaan is the son of Ham due to his seeing the nakedness of his father. And seeing the nakedness of his father, it reveals in scripture that he had slept with his mother. In that sleeping with his mother, he had borne his own son. And that this child, Canaan, was the, the seed of the serpent. It was through him that the seed of the serpent was preserved post flood. That it was also, because Nama was Noah's second wife, and it was through her um, that Canaan was born, and so he was predominantly serpent seed. All right, continue. Nimrod, who according to the Arabs was the son of Canaan and brother of Cush, the sons of Ham, having cast Abraham, who refused to acknowledge him as supreme monarch of the world, into a burning fiery furnace, from which he issued unhurt, said to his courtiers, I will go to heaven and see this God whom Abraham preaches and who protects him. His wise men having represented to him that heaven is very high, Nimrod ordered the erection of a tower by which he might reach it. For 3 years, an immense multitude of workmen toiled at the erection of this tower. Every day Nimrod ascended it and looked up, but the sky seemed to him as distant from the summit of his tower as it had from the level ground. One morning he found his tower cast down, but Nimrod was not to be defeated so easily. He ordered a firmer foundation to be laid, and a second tower was constructed. But however high it was built, the sky remained inaccessible. Then Nimrod resolved on reaching heaven in another fashion. He had a large box made, and to the four corners he attached gigantic birds of the species roc, ROC. They bore Nimrod high into the air, and then fluttered here and fluttered there, and finally upset the box and tumbled him on the top of a mountain, which he cracked by his fall without, however, materially injuring himself. But Nimrod was not penitent, nor ready to submit to the Most High. Therefore God confounded the language of his subjects, and thus rent from him a large portion of his kingdom. God sent a wind, says Abul Faraj, which overthrew the Tower of Babel and buried Nimrod under its ruins. Of Babel, we find fewer traditions preserved amongst the ancient nations than we did of the deluge. The Zend Avesta makes no mention of such an event. It is equally unknown to the Chinese books, though curiously enough, in Chinese hieroglyphics, the tower is the symbol of separation. The Chaldeans, however, says Abadesus, probably quoting Berosus, the priest of Baal, related that the first inhabitants of the earth, this is interesting, that the first inhabitants of the earth, glorifying in their own strength and size, and despising the gods, undertook to raise a tower whose top should reach the sky in the place where Babylon now stands. But when it approached the heavens, the winds assisted the gods and overthrew the work of the contrivers. And its ruins are said to be still in Babylon. And the gods introduced a diversity of tongues among men, who till that time had all spoken the same language. And a war arose between Kronos and Titan. The place on which they built the tower is now called Babylon. Alexander Polyhistor relates the events as follows and quotes the Sibyl. The Sibyl says, when all men had one speech, they built a great tower in order to climb into heaven. But the gods, blowing against it with the winds, threw it down and confounded the language of the builders. Therefore, the city is called Babylon. The writings of this Sibyl, commonly called the Chaldean Sibyl, formed part of the sacred scriptures of the Babylonians. Eupolemus, quoting apparently Syro-Phoenician traditions, relates the matter somewhat differently. The city Babylon, says he, was built after the deluge by those who were saved, but they were giants, and they built the famous tower then. But when this was overthrown by the will of the gods, the giants were scattered over the whole face of the earth. The Armenian traditions, recorded by Moses of Chordin, is to this effect. From them, from the first dwellers on the earth, sprang the race of the giants, with strong bodies and a huge size, full of pride and envy. They formed the godless resolve to build a high tower, but whilst they were engaged on the undertaking, a fearful wind overthrew it, which the wrath of God had sent against it. And unknown words were at the same time blown blown about among men, wherefore arose strife and contention. Okay, so that's the story of Nimrod and the Tower of Babel, and I thought it was interesting that the last portion speaks about the giants, which, when you take the story of Atlantis that I had spoken about in previous shows when talking about the destruction of the First World Age and how the Most High had waged war against a very ancient people, that it talks about in Ezekiel 26, how a people of old time and how their city had been drowned and disappeared, so much so, and that the traces of them and who they were and their city would be wiped from memory so completely that only those passages would really preserve the thought of them, which, we do have the story of the diaspora. I read from the Emerald Tablets of Thoth in that particular story, um, and it talks about how they scattered to all directions once their culture, their motherland, was destroyed and disappeared. That they split off into different places, and that one of the places that was settled upon by them, by the ancient aliens, and was that they went to Kim, to the land of Kim. And it speaks about how they met the hairy barbarians, and that establishing themselves over them in rule over them, they helped to raise up their culture, and that they were treated as the gods, that the Atlanteans were treated by the people that they went to the quote unquote primitive peoples, that they would be looked upon as gods, which they were, and involving themselves with the pre-Adamites, as I said in the Sumerian teachings. It says that they brought forth a hybrid race of beings, and that we see even in the archaeological history the stories of giants, but also of the elongated skull people. They were also hybrid beings that were wiped out, that the Most High God had, for whatever reason, decided to eradicate them from from the annals of history. And so, anyways, we find those stories repeated worldwide. That there was, even in James Churchward, his books on the culture of Mu, the people of Mu, the symbols of Mu, the religion of Mu. Mu, Mu, meaning, it was the name of the motherland. And so these people split and went to all different parts of the world, that we see even the stories of the giants now, and I did the show last week on the giants, how they are still present in the Solomon Islands, that they were said to be here in the United States, especially out west in Central America, in different places in Mexico, other regions of Central America, that the giants were all over. And that even before, like, the cultures that we see, the modern indigenous peoples and Native Americans have spread, whether through North America or Central America, um, that we see these temple complexes being built and arranged, massive structures, huge mound like structures, and cyclopean architecture, that buildings all over the world were being constructed in ways that cannot be replicated in this day and age. And it certainly seems from the building blocks and the way the way that the stones were shaped, quarried and mined, and even carried over several miles, when that seems impossibility and something that we can't do now. That it's an impossibility to carry these huge megaton stones, even with a bunch of wood as rollers. It just doesn't seem feasible. Mm. And so we have the stories of the giants, and these cities that were built by them: Pumapunka, even Baalbek, um, Lagos, Sipar, Uruk, all these Babylonian, Sumerian named cities. And it's interesting also that if you look down from above, they were all built in a straight line, in a perfect straight line. And so these individuals, these cultures stemming from Atlantis, they had the capacity to align their cities to the solstices and the equinoxes, and did very often. They constructed many of their cities and many of the megalithic sites to observe and to be marked in alignment with either the sun, the setting or the rising sun on the summer solstice or the winter solstice. And I think they, did so in order to, because that's the way they kept up with time. That was the way that they monitored the calendar, was they watched for the movement of the sun back and forth between the tropics of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer. And here's another interesting thing that um, not a lot of people know about, and I'll talk about this in the second half of the show, was that the calendar, once you understand the motions, the movements of the luminaries, and how it is that the sun, along with the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter, are all moving in circle with the constellations of the zodiac around Polaris, that these movements create the days, the weeks, the months, the seasons. And so there is a natural calendar established in the skies. And Enoch describes this calendar system. And this is what I'll be, as I said, I'll be speaking about, is how I was able to decrypt these motions by understanding the true cosmology and how it is that the earth is a fixed stationary foundation, motionless, immovable foundation for the heavens, which the firmament being established um, and encompassing its circle, that the luminaries were put in tabernacle within the lower heavens, the atmosphere, and what we consider to be outer space. And so when I come back from break, I will detail that in more regard. But it's interesting that the movements of the sun, as I said, back and forth between the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer, Enoch has that motion labeled according to the houses of the zodiac, because the sun is moving through one of these houses, and it takes it 30 days to move through each one of the signs of the zodiac. And then you have 4 days, the two solstices and the two equinoxes, where the days are equal 12-hour night and day portion on the equinoxes, or the day or the night are twice as long, according to whether it is the summer solstice, where the sun is the day is twice as long as the night, or it's the winter solstice and the night is twice as long as the day. And so, um, Capricorn, when the sun reaches the sign of Capricorn, that is when it is in actually the sign of Capricorn. So the first day of the sign Capricorn is the first month of winter. And then, whereas the Gregorian calendar starts in January and goes on to February, then March, um, God's calendar, the ancient Hebrew calendar, starts with spring and goes through the 3 months of winter. And when the sun actually reaches the Tropic of Cancer, it is also the first day of the zodiac sign of Cancer. And so, as I said, the symbols, the signs of the zodiac are aligned to the motions that Enoch describes. And he has the gates, each one of the gates labeled 1 through 6. Like, I'll go ahead and set the premise for what I'm going to talk about so you can get a better idea. But if you are looking towards your western horizon, and over the course of the year you go out every day and you watch the sun set, well, it will set on a particular part of the horizon depending on what month and what day of the year it is. And so Enoch describes and begins his movement because, as I said, it is God's calendar. The ancient Enochian Hebrew calendar begins with the vernal equinox, when day and night are equal 12-hour portions. And he says that this the sun is located between the third and the fourth gate. And the third gate um, applies to the sign Aries, and it extends from March 21st to April 10th. And so it's on, the day Aries that the vernal equinox begins. And then it moves into, we have Taurus, and then Gemini. And then, as I said, Cancer begins summer. And then you have Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, and then Cancer. And so Cancer and Capricorn are the signs for when the sun is on the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer. And so, again, these gates correspond to when the sun is moving through this zodiac, because the zodiac changes over the course of the year depending on what month it is. And you can tell according to the motions of the luminaries and where the sun rises in which sign. And the ancients had all of this figured out as a science. I mean, they had it down to where they knew where, the sun every morning, they could tell which sign it was in and could tell according to that what time of the year it was. And so their calendar was determined again by the motions of the heavenly luminaries. The day, of course, the 24-hour cycle of the sun. Then you have the beginnings of the months with the waxing crescent. Every Sabbath is aligned to the quarterly phases of the moon, and then you have each month determined by which sign of the zodiac the sun would rise or set in, depending on how they calculated it. But more than likely, it was they could tell it was either going to be sunrise and align to the solstices or to sunset, either way, but that they could keep up with the calendar by moderating and watching just the movement of the sun on the horizon. And so I'll talk more about that when we come back from break, which I do believe should be happening any minute now. And so, anyways, I'll be talking about this tonight as well. All right, we'll be right back.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
All right, welcome back, everybody. First, second hour. And I was talking about the motions of the sun and the moon, and also of the planets and the zodiac itself, because it is these movements, which again are all circular in nature, that it's very clear in the scriptures that it defines the movements of not only the wandering stars, but all luminaries, that they are all moving in circle around Polaris. And we can see evidence of that again in the time-lapse photography of the motions of the stars over the course of an evening. We see that all of the stars and the sun and the moon, they are all moving at the same velocity as well. They all move in union in tangent together with one another, and they all stay in the exact same formations that they've been in for thousands of years, and that these formations define the story that is revealed in the Mazzaroth, which, again, there's an underlying story that reveals uh, even the whole narrative of Christ coming into the flesh in order to redeem Adam and his bloodline, to rectify the fall, that people would be saved in believing on the cross and what the Son had done for each of us in being the Passover lamb, the lamb without spot or blemish that was killed on the Passover in order to then sprinkle its blood and to mark on the doorposts of the Israelites' homes the sign of the Tah, what became the letter T and later a cross, the symbol of a cross. That letter Tah is what was marked on those doorposts in order to bring forgiveness and to not have judgment come upon the Israelites, who were the children of Abraham, and that they were the people of God. And so that's even why we celebrate Passover now in this day and age, which for those that may not have or are not yet concerned with honoring the Levitical feast days, that it's my opinion we should do so, and that this is part of even the whole study that I did in the Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch, that the first 10 chapters of that book are more concerned with revealing the calendar system and also the Levitical feast days and how it was that Christ fulfilled those feast days. And I do so in order to show you that he was the fulfillment of the prophecies as laid out by the Father in the Old Testament. And that what we see in the New Testament is the stories of the apostles in watching their prophecies become fulfilled, and Christ being the Son of God and born of a virgin, that he was the promised one, and that even the story that is revealed in the stars and the Levitical feast days as laid out by the Father in Leviticus 23, they also affirm that he was the fulfillment of that story as it played out, even in those ancient times. And that we still have a portion of those Levitical feast days to be fulfilled. And that studying and doing that study, you will see that it is only makes sense that he will, when he returns for Second Advent, fulfill the fall feasts in the way that they remain yet open, and that his return will accompany the seventh trumpet, and that he would take his judgment seat for the Day of Atonement and the festival of atoning and repenting, that only he is worthy. And that on that day, when he comes and he sends forth his angels to gather the tares for burning and the wheat for preservation, and the goats are separated from the sheep, and everybody is brought before him in his glory and his majesty, and he is seated upon his throne, and we are all brought up on trial and brought before him to determine whether we are to be numbered amongst the elect and worthy of doing so. That is the moment where every knee shall bow, every tongue confess, and his return, as I said, would be on the Feast of Trumpets, and it would be accompanied with the seventh trumpet, and it would be in that moment that all the nations of this world would become the nations of our King and Lord, and that, again, every knee shall bow, every tongue confess, all will be brought before him. Our bodies will all be resurrected, will be changed in the twinkling of an eye, and God willing, will all be placed into glorified being, restored to our immortal bright nature. And then for the Feast of Tabernacles, you have, as John said, New Jerusalem descending from on high, and that the firmament rolled back. The city of God descends down from the top of the firmament to be here on the earth with us when those that are worthy are raised again, and the apostles, many of those that went before him that are with Christ now, will take on seats to actually judge the angels. That the fallen ones, the rebel angels and legion, and even those of fallen humanity will be brought before them as they sit in council with Christ and are about to determine in conduct whether those of us that born into flesh form and now brought before him and seated before them are worthy of everlasting life and worthy of the salvation that God so graciously extends to each of us through the sacrifice of the cross and through the efforts of the Messiah in coming into the flesh in order to redeem us. And so that's, the fullness of the stories, and it's all written into the stars. Even the story of the Mazzaroth, the largest story of the Mazzaroth, looking at the signs and the symbols that they all discuss the enmity between the bloodlines, between the twins, the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. You have the lamb and then representing Yeshua, and you have the bull representing Baal. Then, the virgin, the child born to the virgin, and that it would be he that crushes the head of the serpent. All these things are spoken about in the Mazzaroth. And so it's a messianic story because the coming of Christ is a messianic reclamation and defeating death, who has authority over this duality, has been temporarily given over authority over all those born into this world. But that is, again, it is through Christ that we triumph over death. O death, where is thy sting? Remember from whence thou art fallen, and do the first works. Adam and Eve were promised that after a certain period of time, Christ would be born of their righteous descendants, and that dying on the cross, he would descend down into Sheol in order to bring liberty to the captives. And then taking them as the first fruits of the resurrected dead. Again, this is part of, the spring feast, that they were resurrected for, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and taken during that time and offered to the Most High God. They were baptized in the Arturian Lake by the Archangel Michael, and then brought before the Father and presented to him as the resurrected first fruits, that Christ was the high priest of the Melchizedek order, and that being the first of the resurrected dead as well, that he would be the one to present them to the Father, so that being baptized again and born again anew and restored to their former estate, they were then allowed to enter into New Jerusalem, the place of the righteous, the home of the elect, and they have been dwelling there since that time. And so that story will play out again. That was the first resurrection. And with the second advent, with the return of Christ, all that is set to play out again, but this time it will be for the souls of all those here since that time. And that this will be the end of the world as well, the end of the age. All right, so let me return back now to the calendar of Enoch and explain this really quickly, because this is also presented in the Vedic cosmology, in the Targum translation of the book, chapter 1 of the book of Ecclesiastes, written by Solomon, and that this is also revealed in Second Enoch, and also in a Psalms, I believe. And it's also spoken about by Clement in First Clement chapter 20, which is interesting. But all of these motions are defined in the same manner, and the same movement is described: the sun and the moon, the stars circling above the foundation, the fixed, immovable, stationary foundation of the earth, and that moving again between the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer, that the seasons are established. Like, for instance, we just had the passing of September 22nd, which was the autumnal equinox, that on that day the sun crossed over the equator. And since that time, since September 23rd to October 22nd which is the sign of Libra, that it has been moving through these gates in heaven. And again, crossing the equator, it's moving in the southern latitudes into those countries like Brazil and south of Central America, South America, um, South Africa, Australia, into the lower latitudes below the equator, that this land is now in spring. And while the sun is above them, the land here where we are in northern latitudes, because it's getting less sun and because the nights are getting longer, it's cooling off here. And that's why we see, dew and mist in the morning. Uh, there's a lot of fog now. There's a lot of clouds and storms and rain, um, a lot more precipitation. And so this is what we see occurring. And it will continue to occur as such, that as the sun moves away from us, this portion of the land gets cooler and quieter, and there's more and more precipitation, and even the winds start to pick up, because what you'll see is that the high and low pressure areas and the shifting of the winds and the movements of the storm fronts all are created by the heat of the sun and its interactions with the earth as it's spinning above it. And so, where the sun is located, you have more evaporation, more condensation, and more, well, we always know that that accompanies the chemtrails as well. They tend to spray a lot more when it's raining more and when the food is being grown, which sucks, but you know, it is what it is. That's why, in my opinion, Christ said, unless the days be shortened, there should be no flesh left. And so we are in the sign of Libra. This will continue until October 22nd. And then we enter what will be the second gate, and that will be Scorpio. And then that extends to November 21st. And then we enter into the first gate, which will be Sagittarius. And this one extends to December 21st. And then you have the vernal equinox on the first day of Capricorn, the month of Capricorn, which is again why the winter solstice is aligned with the Tropic of Capricorn. And then afterwards, the sun begins to move back up towards the east. So you're looking on the horizon. On the winter solstice, the sun will be the farthest to the left, which is the southern limits. It will reach that point, and reversing course will every day begin to move back towards the right. And over 91 days, it will move back towards the equator. And so from December 22nd to January 19th, we are in the sign of Capricorn. And then from January 20th to February 19th, we're in the sign of Aquarius. Then the final month of winter, we're back in the third gate, and we're in the sign of Pisces. And then when the sun reaches the equator on March 21st, we are in the sign of Aries. And then the whole cycle begins again. So, as I said, you can easily learn the constellations, because depending on where the sun is, which constellation, whether it's rising in it or setting in it, the ancients are able to determine the calendar because of what they see in the heavens. And so one doesn't even need a written calendar. You can begin again fresh and anew every year just by determining what the day of the vernal equinox is. When on that day where we have equal 12-hour day and 12-hour night, that is the first day of spring. And that is when the sun crosses the vernal equinox. And, the lunar and the solar calendar are slightly different. They're 10 days off from each other, but you can realign them every 3 years just by adding what the ancient Hebrews added a 13th month, Adar number 2, and that this would bring the calendars back in alignment with each other. And so, as I said, if you did not have a written down calendar, or we didn't have a calendar that said that it was this particular day of this particular year, and nobody knew, but we just had to figure it out from observing and looking at the stars, that can easily be determined. And so, in my opinion, that's the calendar we should all be going by, and that we should be observing for the Sabbaths and the Levitical feast days. It's the calendar that the Most High God established on the creation week. And so, why wouldn't you want to follow that calendar even now? It's not difficult to determine where we are in that cycle. And as I said, it doesn't always align perfectly, that because of the way that the lunar and the solar calendars come together, that the year will begin on Kadesh, the Kadesh that is closest to the vernal equinox, because it will be that Kadesh which is mostly in line with the beginning of spring, because again, spring starts when the sun is positioned on the vernal equinox. And so the feast days are going to fluctuate a little bit according to the seasons, as far as the solar year. But you can always determine, and Passover will always be the evening before the full moon Sabbath, because again, the Sabbaths are linked to the quarterly phases of the moon, and so wherever the vernal equinox occurs, the waxing crescent, which appears nearest to that time, that will be also when the barley will begin to ripen for what will be, the feast of the unleavened bread, and the wave offering, the sheaf offering, the waving of the barley for the first fruits. And so that's how Enoch tells us to determine where we are in the beginnings, in the months, and also the years. That he tells us exactly. And again, that's the motions I'm going to help people to understand, and the calendar that I'm going to explain at the conference. And again, it's the one written into the stars. It's the easiest one to understand once you really study it out. And it's the one that the luminaries, as I said, are in alignment with. And so I'll be speaking about these things tonight as well. Let me check the chat room, see if there is any questions. And then I'm going to talk about something that I've been looking into and reading. This has to do with it's kind of difficult to go into the subject now, but I do want to share a little bit about it because it's something that I will also go into soon. I promise to do a show on what's called Adrenochrome. And for those that don't know what Adrenochrome is, it is mentioned by different Illuminati families and high level individuals, and even mentioned in the movies, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which was written by Hunter S. Thompson. And for those that don't know, Hunter S. Thompson was involved with the Illuminati. He's said by Paul Bonacci, who was part of the group of kids that Senator John DeCamp ended up representing pro bono. And if you don't know what the Franklin cover-up is, it's these group of kids who came out in the early 80s and basically pointed a finger at the Catholic hierarchy of the Boys and Girls Club of Omaha, these orphanages and foster care systems supposedly put into place to take care of orphans and to help, the children that would come up in these systems, that basically giving them drugs and pimping them out to high level industrialists, politicians, entrepreneurs, business industrialists, judges, sheriffs. I mean, on and on and on. basically those organizations and those positions which are largely represented by the Freemasonic Brotherhood, that a lot of these positions are held by these secret society members, and that what we don't know is that they have allegiances to each other, which are covert. And that's why it is also that, like, for instance, we saw with the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh as Supreme Court Justice, this individual that's going to be on the highest court in the land for several decades, if we make it that far. And he is a known accused rapist, and that he's reported even by his friends to have attempted with others to get girls drunk and out of their senses so that they could be sexually abused by groups of he and his buddies. And that this individual, protected by, these secret society connections, that he was pushed through and confirmed as will be confirmed as the Supreme Court Justice. And even if you have just accusations, numerous accusations of an individual, a potential justice, having such behavior, why would you allow them on to the highest court in the land? And yet that's what happens. And so what are people supposed to think about justice and truth here in America? Certainly cannot be a good thing. And if he is that way, who knows, how many compromising pictures and videos are out there of him in difficult positions, and who the people that have this hard evidence of against him are going to use him for their own reasons. And so anyways, back to Adrenochrome. So Hunter S. Thompson, he's an author that spoke about doing a lot of hardcore drugs during his time in being an author and writing all these just insane books. There's 2 movies been made about him, one with Bill Murray called Where the Buffalo Roam, and another one with Johnny Depp called Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, I believe, which was the title of one of his books. And in it, he receives, in one of the scenes in the movie, he receives this drug called adrenochrome from this individual who speaks about how he received it from a hardcore Satanist, and that he's not supposed to ask about, how he got it, but that this drug gets you higher than anything else out there that's available, including things like heroin, which I've never done heroin. Don't understand the people that give their lives and that will sell their souls to be messed up on this drug. doesn't make sense to me why anybody would want to be addicted to something like that and why they would do the things that they do for it. Um, I can't understand it, but there's a lot of people that addicted to it. I guess they do. Because I've watched, that show Intervention, and it always amazes me how far people will allow themselves to go in order to not even get high anymore, because a lot of these people aren't even getting high on these drugs, but doing it just to maintain a semblance of normality and not get sick, which, is just insane to me as well. And so it's mentioned in that movie that this adrenochrome is extracted from a living donor, and that the only way you can get it is by removing it from some victim that had previous to its extraction been terrorized in some manner to such degree that their blood and their system is flooded with this adrenaline and then extracted. This is the drug that these elites are buying and selling and using to get high. And so there's rumors of the black market and these dark web underground that individuals are selling not only child pornography but also snuff films, which, if you don't know what a snuff film is, like a real life um, where they are videotaping somebody actually being raped, murdered, and you know killed in some manner, and that the elites get off on this kind of thing, and they buy and sell these tapes which depict this kind of abomination. And there have been a number of people that have been busted, involved in these kind of rings and selling this kind of material. But there are, like, if you just look up adrenochrome on YouTube, you'll find several individuals that have done documentaries where they're talking about this, and they show those segments that I'm speaking about. But anyways, the reason I'm mentioning it now is because I've been doing some research on this drug and how it's connected to high level Satanism, and that these elites have perfected not only terrorizing through pedophilia and satanic ritual abuse and things of that nature, they have perfected terrorizing children and murdering these victims, extracting this drug for them so that they can sell it on the black market. And that these people are so twisted that they are involved in the consumption of this drug, and that it's being sold for large amounts of money on the black market. And the crazy thing about this is that when you make mention or even, bring this up in conversation with somebody, normal human people, the masses, the what they call the useless eaters, people will look at you like you're crazy. And yeah, it sounds totally bonkers, totally nuts. But this is the kind of thing that the elites themselves and the victims of those that have been, you know, abused by these high level satanic illuminists are reporting themselves. And I just purchased a book called Cannibalism, Blood Drinking. Let me get the exact name for you. So I can tell you exactly what it is. So if you're interested in looking it up yourself, you can do so. And I'll tell you the name of this individual too. It is called Cannibalism, Blood Drinking, and High Adept Satanism. And it's by a Kurth R. Barker. It was only $8. He also wrote another book called Angelic Defenders and Demonic Abusers, the memoirs of a satanic ritual abuse survivor. And this individual is now a Christian, but was raised in these secret society families by these high level adept Satanists. And during his early childhood, uh, he was basically pimped out as a sex slave. He was a young boy that was made to dress up as a little girl, and they called him Kathy. And they pimped him out to these high level illuminists, and he describes what he witnessed in the satanic ritual abuse that he was made to be part of. And it's absolutely bizarre, the stories that are related by these individuals. And I mean, there are, I can't even tell you how many, if you just search on Amazon.com, satanic ritual abuse, how many books will come up by individuals like Bryce Taylor, Kathy O'Brien, um, other individuals like this one that I'm talking about here, Kurth Barker, all these different people that have books on Amazon about what they went through and what they survived. And yeah, it sounds crazy. But when you read their accounts, they report on the cannibalism, the weird rituals, the sex orgies, the fertility festivals, all these things that these people are involved in. And it's absolutely insane to normal people that people could be putting children through this kind of experience. But I mean, it is widespread. It is deeply entrenched into the politics, the high level politics of countries all over the world. All right, so I typed in um, satanic ritual abuse. There's a book here from 2014, Satanic Ritual Abuse Exposed: The Recovery of a Christian Survivor. Another book, Satanic Pedophiles Exposed, Absolute Magic Exposed, Devil Worship. Let me take out the exposed part. just satanic ritual abuse. And the number of books that come up is just, it's insane. Hell -1. My story of deliverance from satanic ritual abuse and my journey to freedom. Only God rescued me, my journey from satanic ritual abuse. An encyclopedia of satanic ritual abuse. The Rabbit Hole, a satanic ritual abuse survivor's story. Breaking the circle of satanic ritual abuse, recognizing and recovering from the hidden trauma. Spiritual warfare and satanic ritual abuse, exposing the hidden demonic schemes of SRA. Boxes of Secrets, a gripping true account of overcoming sexual abuse in a perfect Christian home. Restoring survivors of satanic ritual abuse. Don't Make Me Go Back, Mommy, a child's book about satanic ritual abuse. Mental Liberation in the Age of Thought Control, Deprogramming, Satanic Ritual Abuse, MK Ultra, Monarch, and Illuminati Mind Control. Satanic Ritual Abuse and Mormonism. Other altars, roots, and realities of cultic and satanic ritual abuse and multiple personality disorder. My True Story, Childhood Sex Abuse, Rape, and Domestic Violence. That's just the first page. And there's 7 pages of these kind of titles. And so, you know, I mean, if you can study or read just a few of these books for yourself, it is just crazy. Pedophilia and Empire, Satan and Sodomy, the Deep State. Chapter 20, Seville, occult death cult practitioner of satanic ritual abuse. A field guide to advanced spiritual warfare, deliverance, exorcism, and healing the effects of ritual abuse. Ministering to soul fragmentation, dissociative identity disorder, and satanic ritual abuse. The Silent War. I mean, Lucifer's Lodge, satanic ritual abuse in the Catholic Church. Life After Brokenness, a ministry guide for trauma victims that disassociate DID. I mean, it is crazy. All right, I think we're at the end. God bless all. Good night. Remember to join us this evening, 12 a.m. to 2 a.m. I'll be on Rob's show on Truth Frequency Radio. Be blessed.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.